Did you know that rubber bands last longer when you refrigerate them? Did you know that there are 293 ways to make change for $1? Did you know that the eye of an ostrich is bigger than its brain? Did you know that a dime has 118 ridges on its edge? Did you know that in Japan, for every one person, there are 23 vending machines? Did you know that Minnie Mouse's real name isn't Minnie? It's Minerva. Minnie is just a nickname. You may be sitting here tonight and asking yourself the question, what in the world do any of these random truths have to do with our pastor's sermon tonight? And here's the answer. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. I was reading in the book of John this week, trying to see what God wanted to show us about how He fathers us. You know, I'm reading through here, just scouring the scriptures, and I come across what at first glance to me seemed to be just a random part of the Jesus story. Like the opening facts I gave you were somewhat random. In the middle of John chapter 7, at first glance to me at least, it seemed as though this was just some filler part of the story, right? Like at the beginning of the book or at the beginning of chapter 7, Jesus' brothers want him to go to Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. They want him to go so that his fame can increase. They're like, man, nobody's ever going to, your fame's not going to grow if you don't show up. And Jesus is like, I'm not going. I don't care about fame, but I'm not going. Because he knows that the religious leaders in Jerusalem are going to try to kill him. But then later, Jesus decides to go to the festival, but he keeps himself hidden so that people can't recognize him. Now, if you skip forward then to the end of chapter 7, we read that Jesus shows up on the last day of the Festival of Tabernacles, and he says these beautiful words that have been so transformative in the lives of countless people throughout the ages. Look at John chapter 7, verse 37. On the last day, the climax of the festival, Jesus stood and he shouted to the crowds, anyone who is thirsty can come to me. Anyone who believes in me can come and drink. For the scriptures declare rivers of living water will flow from his heart. When he said living water, he was speaking of the Spirit who would be given to everyone believing in him. Now, let me tell you something. As a pastor, the end of chapter 7, those verses right there, that'll preach. That'll preach. I'm telling you, look, the pastors in this room, tell me you wouldn't love to preach rivers of living water. Come on. That's the good stuff. That's like the easy stuff. It's the fun stuff. It's like, oh, this is so good. I love preaching about that kind of stuff. But it was this stuff seemingly just random in the middle piece of the story found in John chapter 7, where Jesus is interacting with the crowd. And God keeps, as I'm reading chapter 7, I just keep reading and reading, and God just keeps bringing me back to this part. If you've got your Bibles, flip over to John chapter 7. I'm going to read quite a few verses here, but I'm going to start in verse number 10. After his brothers left for the festival, Jesus also went, though secretly, staying out of public view. The Jewish leaders tried to find him at the festival and kept asking if anyone had seen him. There was a lot of grumbling about him among the crowds. Some argued that he's a good man, and others said he's nothing but a fraud who deceives people. But no one had the courage to speak favorably about him in public, for they were afraid of getting in trouble with the Jewish leaders. Then midway through the festival, Jesus went up to the tabernacle and began to teach. The people were surprised when they heard him. How does he know so much when he hasn't been trained? They asked. Jesus told them, my message is not my own. It comes from God who sent me. Anyone who wants to do the will of God will know whether my teaching is from God or merely my own. Those who speak for themselves want glory only for themselves. But a person who speaks to honor the one who sent him speaks truth, not lies. Moses gave you the law, but none of you obeys it. In fact, you're trying to kill me. I think I could have preached right there even, and it would have been just fine. But verse 20, I keep going. The crowd replied, you're a demon. You're demon-possessed. Who's trying to kill you? And then Jesus replies, I did one miracle on the Sabbath, and you were amazed. He's talking about the healing of the paralyzed man at the pool of Bethesda. But you work on the Sabbath too when you obey Moses' law of circumcision. Actually, this tradition of circumcision began with the patriarchs long before the law of Moses. Verse 23, for if the correct time for circumcising your son falls on the Sabbath, and you go ahead and do it so as to not break the law of Moses. So why should you be angry with me for healing a man on the Sabbath? And then this is the verse that keeps sticking for me. Look beneath the surface so that you can judge correctly. Another version, the Christian Standard Bible says it this way, verse 24. Stop judging according to outward appearances, rather judge according to righteous judgment. The crowd that spoke to Jesus on that day were, at minimum, devoted religious people. They followed the law. They were there, in fact, to participate in this Feast of Tabernacles. Everyone in the crowd seemed to be trying to decide who Jesus was. Some thought he was a good man. Some thought he was a lunatic. Some thought he was a wise teacher. Others thought he was a lawbreaker. They were trying to make these determinations based on what they thought they knew. Some people made their decision about Jesus based upon the opinions of the religious leaders of the day. Some people made their decisions based upon what they thought they understood the Messiah would be like. Still others based their decision on what the people around them thought. Regardless of what they thought they knew or how they reached their conclusions about Jesus, Jesus' response to them that day was to look beneath the surface so that they could judge correctly. In other words, they weren't looking beneath the surface and they weren't seeing him correctly. I've known a lot of people in my life who have decided to leave the raising of their children to their children. They seem to be content to let their child make the decisions for how they will act and for what they will do in any given situation. I once watched a lady in a parking lot with a 3-year-old. She opened the back door of the vehicle and told the 3-year-old to get inside. The 3-year-old stomped her foot, said no, and ran around the back of the car to the other side and demanded to be let in on that side. The mom walked across to the back, opened the door and said, "Oh, is it this side you want to get in, honey?" And the little girl was like, "No!" And she ran around to the other side. And the mom walked back over to the other side. And she was like, "Oh, sorry, honey, is this the side you want to be on?" And the girl just stomped her feet and stood there and wouldn't get in the car. It was all I could do not to walk over and offer my belt to that lady. I was like, oh my goodness. I'm here to tell you that as far as the Shupps go, I refuse to leave the raising of my children to anyone other than Amy and I. We may be done raising 2 of them, but we're still raising a son. And you can ask him, what's the number one thing that your dad tells you? It's this: I am raising a man. In this house, I am raising a man. I'm raising a man that knows how to be in love with Jesus. I understand I'm not raising a perfect man. I understand he makes mistakes. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm trying to raise a man who will learn to honor and serve and love a woman. I'm trying to raise a man who knows how to love other people and work for their good. We're trying to raise a man that knows how to put his hand to work and to work hard, not just for himself, but ultimately for the glory of God. We're trying to raise a man who is wise and who seeks after the counsel of God. Well, you may be saying to yourself, are you saying that you tell him how to think about things? Yeah, I do. Not in the don't think for yourself kind of way, but in the let me help you see the bigger picture and why this is important kind of way. You see, children need the wise perspective of their parents to succeed in life. Have you ever asked a teenage boy, what were you thinking when they did something that they shouldn't have done? And they responded, I don't know. It's because it's true. They don't know. They weren't thinking. See, a good parent tries to help a child figure out what they should have been thinking about in that moment. When I read this story about Jesus' interaction with this crowd, did you catch what didn't happen? See, when Jesus was being evaluated by the people in the crowd that day, think about this. The people were there to draw near to the Lord, right? That was their whole purpose in coming, was to draw near to the Lord, to worship him. But here's what's funny. They never stopped and asked the Lord who Jesus was. They asked the religious leaders their opinion. They asked other people their opinion. They may have even looked at what they thought they knew about the Messiah and tried to draw their opinion from there, but they never went to receive the perspective of the Lord. Our Father doesn't just have a good perspective on life. He is the truth, and he has the proper way to apply the truth in every aspect of your life. He is the only perspective that matters. Psalm 25, verse number 4, show me the right path, O Lord. Point out the road for me to follow. Lead me by your truth and teach me, for you are the God who saves me. All day long, I put my hope in you. Verse number 8, the Lord is good and does what is right. He shows the proper path to those who go astray. He leads the humble in doing right, teaching them his way. The Lord leads with unfailing love and faithfulness all who keep his covenant and obey his demands. Our Father wants to give us his perspective so that we can see the bigger kingdom picture, so that we can all live with all of the beauty, the authority, the success in life that only his perspective in us can bring. You might be saying to yourself, why does this matter? Why does this matter? What's so important that you would take the entire sermon to talk about looking beneath the surface so that you could judge a situation correctly? What's so important about getting God's perspective so that we can see things correctly? Why a whole sermon? The answer is because shallow Christianity is worthless. Shallow Christianity is worthless. The weak, immature practice of Christianity does not help you. It does not help others, and it does not make hell tremble. Shallow Christianity keeps people compartmentalized. It keeps us in this way of thinking that says, well, there's God stuff, and then there's me stuff. There's the things that God would like that I do, and then there's the things that I want to do. This shallow Christianity, where we look at life based upon how we're feeling, or based upon how we've once heard it described to us, or based upon what we think we remember from a story we heard as a child, that shallow Christianity, it does us so much harm. So much harm. In shallow Christianity, instead of having a mind set on the things above, it's okay for your thoughts to be about yourself and just to be saturated with self. That's okay in shallow Christianity. In shallow Christianity, instead of thinking of new ways to honor and to serve one another, it's okay for you to just meet your own needs first. In shallow Christianity, instead of sacrificing oneself for the cause of Christ, for laying your life down no matter what, it's okay to only do the things that you like to do and to forget anything else. In shallow Christianity, instead of never growing weary of doing good, it's okay that I am never inconvenienced. But if we look under the surface of our lives, if we go deeper to get God's perspective, what we find is that everything, hear me, dear ones, everything is supposed to be all about Him. Everything. This life I live is not about me. It's about Him. This book, hear me, is not about you. It's about Him. Every story is the story of Him. You don't need to open this and look for what might help you. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying God doesn't use the Bible to help us, to strengthen us, to encourage us. But you would do better to open this up to discover Him and His heart. Because that's the intent of the author. If you know Him, you have what you need. If you know Him, you'll find the right step to take. If you know Him better, you will find transformation. If you know Him better, your struggles will cease. If you know Him better, you will embrace grace. If you know Him better, you'll experience mercy. If you know Him better, you'll take hold of hope. You need more of Him. You don't need more of an understanding of who you are and what you get. You need Him. The money you have is not your own. It all belongs to Him. This church doesn't belong to me, and it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to Him. Your calendar, your day's events, they don't belong to you. They belong to Him. You don't have to be comfortable all the time. You belong to Him. Sometimes I think for myself, and so I will speak it to you as well and see if this applies to you, but sometimes I think for myself about myself that I really need God. I need to take God's perspective. And I need to go a little bit deeper for myself, because sometimes I miss these truths. And it's so subtle that I don't even realize I'm doing it until much, much later. I need God's perspective on how I'm supposed to live in the moment by moment of my life. That's hard to think about when you think about what you'll be doing next year. That is so hard if you start going, well, what does this look like for the rest of my life? Well, seeing as how you and I don't know how much time we have left here, I would suggest that we take it down to a more manageable, what am I going to do today? Like, I need God's perspective about today. And let's leave tomorrow and all of its worries to the Lord. And let's just go back to today and start asking God for His perspective today. Shallow Christianity evaluates other people based upon what we perceive the truth to be about them. In shallow Christianity, rather than letting no unwholesome word come out of your mouth, in shallow Christianity, it's okay to make fun of other people. It's okay to practice a little sarcasm now and then. In other words, sometimes people need to be put in their place, so I jokingly mock them. In shallow Christianity, that's okay. In shallow Christianity, rather than meeting people in their place of need, in their brokenness, it's okay to reject them because their sin is, whether past or present, is gross and I don't understand it and I don't like it. And so in shallow Christianity, it's totally okay to reject that because it makes me uncomfortable. In shallow Christianity, rather than forgiving your enemies and trying to live at peace with everyone, it's okay to hold an offense because after all, their behavior is offensive. But when we see other people from the deeper place of God's perspective, we learn that because we have been loved unconditionally, and because the Spirit of God is in us, that we actually do have the ability to love others unconditionally. The deeper perspective that God gives us as Christ followers is enough to help us forgive past sin in people's lives and work to help them walk out of their current sin. When we're willing to go deeper with other people, we start to recognize that because other people are offensive to us, we start to recognize that the offense we're feeling is coming from something. Not just because that person is a jerk, but because that person is broken and in need of Jesus. See, the deeper things, when we look at the deeper things from God's perspective, we instead of our heart growing cold towards that person, what happens now is our heart begins to break for them because, but for the grace of God, there go I. I may not have their problem, but I've had my problems. I know what it's like to be broken and needy. So when I see the person who would normally offend me, but I ask for God's perspective, what happens is I begin to see them through the eyes of the Father, and I begin to see their need and their desperation, and that they're just acting out because they don't know what to do. And so rather than be holding them at arm's length, now instead I'm pulling them near, and I'm willing to get a little bit of the junk on me so that I can help walk them up out of the pit that they are drowning in. When we go deeper, we're going to need the Lord to give us the same kind of perspective that he gave Samuel that day when he sent him to Jesse to find the anointed king of Israel. Samuel kept saying, look at that guy. He's amazing. And what did God tell him? Don't look at the outward appearance, the surface, the shallow thinking. Don't look at the outward appearance. Look instead, go deeper. Look at the heart. That's what we need. We need to be a people who, in dealing with others, stop looking at surface stuff. Stop allowing ourselves to be so easily offended by broken, sinful people who have no real other option but to be broken and sinful. They need Jesus. We need to be the people who stop looking at the surface and instead go, God, that person really offends me. Help me to forgive. Now help me to see the deeper thing that's going on in their life so that I might, if you should lead me to be, the tool you use to rescue someone who is perishing. Shallow Christianity watches what's happening in the world and panics. Shallow Christianity sees everything that's going on in the world around them, and they panic and start praying for a rapture to come so that they can just avoid all of this mess, go to heaven. But God cares about this world. He cares about what's happening. So those who now look at life differently, they start to shake off this shallow thinking. And they start asking God, show me the deeper things about the world. Show me where I'm living. I'm created to be a difference maker, Father. Show me the difference. Change the way I think so that I'll stop looking for an exit ramp and start looking for the next place to work. People who go deep with the Lord realize that the kingdom of God is still at hand. People who go deep with the Lord realize that He is still on His throne, no matter what the news cycle would try to convince you of. Deep people know that God still runs this show. And they know, and they are all in to that. Those who pursue the deeper things of the Lord, when they see a suffering world, they don't cower and wonder how it all got so terrible. Instead, they stand up and they start praying down the heavens over the part of the world they have influence over the things that God has given them. Do you realize, dear ones, that if we will stop being shallow and we will go deeper, the solution for this country's problems will come to pass. We're not praying for our leaders the way we're supposed to pray for our leaders. We're not going out into the world around us and reaching people for Jesus. We're not describing by using our testimony the wonderful things that God has done. We're not doing those things as a general rule. Please don't get all offended like, I do that. Okay, thank you. I so appreciate it. I got to preach to a bigger group. But we're not doing some of those things. And listen, I'm preaching to myself too. I don't stand up here perfect. I need to change as well. People who pursue the deeper things live generously. When they see a problem in an area that they can't personally reach out and do anything about, they'll send money to ministries doing good work in those areas because they know I may not be able to get there, but my dollars can get there, and the people who are there can use those to reach the king, to reach the kingdom's purpose in that area. People who go deeper to get God's perspective look at the world around them. They look at the tragedies happening all around them. They look at the suffering of people. They look at the misunderstandings that people have about who God is. They look at the deception that people are living in because they have an enemy who is trying his very best to steal, kill, and destroy them. And the people who go deeper with God are the people who stand up. They take the authority that they've been given by God in the moment because of Christ. They go out in the power and the leadership of the Holy Spirit of God, and they bring Jesus to the hell of other people's lives. That's what they do. That's what deeper people do. Did you know that it's entirely possible for a human being to drown in an inch of water? And your enemy is doing everything he can to kill you in the shallow places. Everything he can to kill you in the shallow places. So my question for you tonight in closing is this. When you look at your life, do you see shallow places? I do. I do. I see deep places. Don't get me wrong. I'm smart enough to know that in some of those deep places, they're deep because God has gifted me with some things, and I can use those well, and I'm used to it, and I'm you know what I mean. Like I'm good in those areas, right? I'm comfortable going deep in these places. I'm sure you're just like that. You have some strengths and talents that God uses, and you go deep with those. But our lives are more than just those moments. There are other places in our lives where we may have become comfortable in the kiddie pool. Maybe you just haven't thought about getting out and going to the deeper places. Maybe you've just been deceived and you say to yourself, well, I wasn't even thinking about that at all. Every time I've ever thought about it, I just seem to think about other things, and I stopped thinking about that. Well, maybe tonight is the night where you ask the Lord to allow you to start having a deeper understanding in some of the shallower areas of your life. I don't know about you, but I do know most of you pretty well. And I can say this. I think if I know you well, and I think I do, I think you know what I'm telling you tonight is right. I think you know that with regards to yourself or others or the world around you, you've been living in the shallow end in some of those places. And it's time not to overreact, not to, by a moralistic work of your hands, go out and start doing stuff just to do stuff. Oh, please don't do that. Please don't do that. But instead, by the grace of God, if you would look at those areas, and wherever the Holy Spirit begins to illuminate a shallow place in your life right there, rather than overreact or feel shame and guilt, you just could go to the Lord and go, God, I have not agreed with you in this. I didn't even know, or I knew, but I didn't care. So I'm repenting. I see that I'm not right. Now what I need, Father, is for you both to clarify but I also need you to inspire. Oh, let's add in this. I also need you to lead me into deeper places here. If I try to do it on my own, I'm either going to overreact or underreact, Lord. So what I need is, I need your leadership. I need your lordship. I need you. You're illuminating it. I'm going to write it down so I don't forget it. And I'm going to be praying about this with you, Father. I'm going to be looking on the horizon to see the deeper places that you want to put me in with regards to this. But I'm not going to overreact, and I'm not going to underreact. I'm going to follow you into the deeper places. You can take a deep breath. It's done. It's over. I told you, sometimes I wish all the messages could be, woo. But I think if you think about this for just a second, you'll realize nothing that's been said here tonight need be condemning. That's not the point. That would be the work of the enemy. Instead, tonight can be inspiring. Tonight can be the night where you recognize, oh man, I have been practicing some shallow Christianity. But praise God, He's going to take me to the deeper places. That should excite you. Your toes should not be sore. You should be excited.